Welcome everyone. Silakan Mbak Lilis. Mute.
Hello everyone, welcome Frederica from Passau. Good morning there, and we are here. It's in the afternoon in Jakarta. Halo semua yang sudah bergabung, terima kasih.
I think Christian and
Hi.
Richardson also join us now. Welcome. Aulia. Oh.
Christian. Halo Aulia. Sehat?
Hello everyone. Yeah, it is like quite early morning from Glasgow.
Okay.
Hi Aulia.
Halo Ibu Heni.
Miss
Halo
you.
Mbak Heni.
Miss you Aulia. Aku nggak tampil ya Mbak Lilis ya, dengerin aja
Nggak
ya.
apa-apa. Iya, makasih Mbak Heni.
Mungkin Aulia mau sapa-sapa dulu dengan teman-teman.
Yeah, good morning Frederica. It's also like early morning in Germany.
Good morning. Yeah, but that's still okay. It's almost 9 o'clock in the morning, so that's good time.
Thank you, Frederica. You might looking for my face. Wait a minute. Thank you so much for coming to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's really nice.
Yeah. It's very great opportunity now because we can do discussion from all over the world, just online. Oke, 3 menit lagi ya. Yoka.
Oke, 3 menit lagi kita mulai.
Ya, sambil promo di ruang sebelah. Oke Kak, silakan dimulai.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Nation City Arena Sport Events, Nation Building and City Politics in Indonesia. Selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, rekan-rekan semuanya. Saya sangat senang sekali siang hari ini bisa menyambut Bapak dan Ibu sekalian dalam acara webinar kita hari ini. My name is Yoka Pramadi and I'm your host today. Nama saya Yoka Pramadi dan saya akan menjadi host acara webinar hari ini. Yang terhormat Bapak Profesor Ahmad Najib Burhani, PLT Kepala Organisasi Riset Ilmu Pengetahuan Sosial dan Humaniora Badan Riset Inovasi Nasional. Yang kami hormati Dr. Lilis Mulyani, PLT Kepala Kantor Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya Badan Riset dan Inovasi Nasional. Today's agenda will be opening speech from Dr. Lilis Mulyani as Head of Research Center for Society and Culture, and then continues with presentation from Dr. Frederique Trottier that will be guided by Ms. Aulia Hadi as moderator, and then finally discussion. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, acara kita hari ini nanti akan dibuka oleh opening speech dari Dr. Lilis Mulyani sebagai Kepala Kantor Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya BRIN, dan dilanjutkan dengan presentasi dan diakhiri dengan diskusi. And then setelah itu juga akan ada acara foto bersama, jadi Bapak dan Ibu sekalian juga harus mengaktifkan kameranya. So, ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Frederique Trottier. She is assistant professor in comparative development and cultural studies at University of Passau. Her research interests concentrate on sport, urban geography, and popular culture in Southeast Asia, and especially in Indonesia. She is building a solid publication record in this area with articles in the International Journal of the History of Sport and Asia Pacific Journal of Sport and Social Science, and also a chapter in the Routledge Handbook of Sport in Asia. Also, she is an editorial board member of the Asian Journal of Sport, History, and Culture. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, today moderator is Ms. Aulia Hadi. She is our colleague too in Research Center for Society and Culture, and now she is pursuing PhD in University of Glasgow. Beliau juga sebelumnya menamatkan sarjana dari Ilmu Komunikasi, Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik, Visipol Universitas Gadjah Mada. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, saya yakin Bapak dan Ibu sekalian sudah tidak sabar lagi menunggu pemaparan dari Dr. Trottier. So, guten Morgen for Dr. Trottier. Sorry, is that correct? And yeah, I just learned today. Danke for diese. And please, Mr. Aulia, the time and screen is yours.
I think like before we start the discussion, there will be like a welcoming remark for Mbak Lilis.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah, I missed that part. So please, Ms. Dr. Lilis Mulyani to give opening speech.
Okay, thank you very much, Yoka. I think Yoka is a little bit nervous here. Thank you, Yoka. Good morning for Dr. Trottier and Aulia in UK and in Passau. Selamat siang untuk peserta yang lainnya, semuanya di Indonesia. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude for Dr. Frederique Trottier and Aulia for initiating this very important webinar on nations sport and arena. On behalf of the Research Center for Society and Culture, the National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN, which is the new name of the Indonesian Institutes of Sciences, or LIPI, I am very pleased to host this webinar. In modern society, we all know that sport can become one factor that forms or bolster personal or group identity. Competition between groups or nations, particularly through sport competition, may play in the process of identity formation, which is very interesting to see and to discuss whether and how this process through which individuals try to sustain their identity. I actually would like to share only two short slides about the picture. Sorry. So athletes carrying the national flags and supporter who aims to boost the spirit of competitiveness have shown both generic and these identities, yeah, whether it's personal, whether it's group, whether it's cities, or whether it's also national or like state identities. In this slide, we can see that in 1963, for example, under the Sukarno old order regime, the Indonesia has successfully held Ganevo, or the Games of the New Emerging Forces, aiming to show International Olympic Committee, or IOC, that the new emerging countries, such as the Asian and African countries, and also few communist countries, such as China and Russia, have the capability to create their own international Olympics. Indonesia, in this particular event, the Ganevo, is established the event in the aftermath of the IOC censure for the politically charged fourth edition of Asian Games in 1962 in Jakarta, which Indonesia hosted and prevent some countries' athletes for entry card. So Indonesian government at that time is very close to China and prevent the Taiwanese and the Israel athletes to come to Indonesia. And this was the first time IOC has ever suspended its member. And the Ganevo actually made it clear that that politics and sports is intertwined, and this ran against the doctrine of the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, which separate politics and sport. While Indonesian President Sukarno responded that the IOC is political. And we can see here one statement from President Sukarno. He said at that time, go to hell with IOC. We are developing countries, have our own international sport competition, which is the Ganevo. And the Ganevo, which is held in 1963, also held by participated with. There are 51 participants from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. And in this particular, Sukarno used sport, or Ganevo, as one tool to show national pride and national politics of identity. And the latest event in 2021 in Tokyo Olympics, after the Tokyo Olympics, after winning her gold medal, a poster of Gracia Poli spread over the internet, showing her covered with the Indonesian red and white flag, quoting her own reflection on multiculturalism in Indonesia. She said that my coach is Chinese, my field partner is Papuan Blitar, and I'm originally a Minahasan with a touch of Chinese. If it is not for Indonesia that unites us, we will never be united. So my reflection here in this particular, in these two events, two historical events, is hopefully can give an insight for a more meaningful and in-depth discussion on how sport event is actually more than just a celebration of identity or a joyful event where people cheering up for their athletes. But more than that, it holds a deeper process of identity and nation building, which may also pose a threat of solidifying differences and unwanted fragmentation between groups. So sport contains bigger role in nation building, and I'm proud that PMB BRIN pioneers the discussion on such an important topics. So again, I would like to thank Frederike Trottier and Aulia Hadi and Yoka also for their willingness to create or to start this kind of discussion in PMB BRIN, and also to all webinar participants, who have joined us this afternoon. I hope that we can have a fruitful discussion later on. Thank you very much, and I will return the screen to Yoka Permadi. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Lilis, for the opening speech and the insight information. So this is the main. Okay, so please, Miss Aulia, the time and screen is yours to be a moderator today.
Okay. Good morning, all participants from Glasgow, UK, and just like thank you for Mbak Lilis for delivering the welcoming remark, and also Yoka for hosting this event, and also welcome to our speaker Frederica Trottier. So yeah, it's just like Yoka just give like introduction about Frederica. So yeah, Frederica is the assistant professors in comparative development and cultural studies, particularly in Southeast Asia at the University of Passau, Germany. And yeah, it just like studies on like sport, nations and politics in Indonesia are still very restricted these days. It's just like there are several publications in journal articles written by some like scholars like Frit Columbine and then Andy Fuller and some Indonesian scholars just like Fajar Junaidi. And this book like has just been published. It's just like one of the pioneer book to discuss about the sport event, nation building and city politics in Indonesia. And here in her book, Frederica also tried to introduce the special geographical approach to understand the meaning of the sport events in Indonesia. And this book just like deliver kind of it's comprehensive studies about the multi-sport event in Indonesia, just like Mbak Lilis introduced, from the Asian Games in 1962 to the current days. And it's just like also elaborate how the political context in Indonesia from a very Jakarta-centric to the decentralizations during the post-reform influenced this kind of political arena between the cities in Indonesia. So without further ado, I deliver the time for Frederica to deliver your presentations.
Selamat siang, and so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for hosting me and welcoming me with so many nice words, and apologies that I don't provide my presentation in Indonesian, but as the book is in English, it's kind of a mixture, or produce a mixture in my brain to then kind of retranslate. And so I hope it's okay for everybody to do it in English. And thanks again to Mbak Lilis for your opening words, and for Aulia for introducing me and my book, and to Yoka for hosting this event. So I will start sharing my screen now, and then get started with my talk. Is it visible for everybody, the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, so thanks again for having me and for the warm welcome. So in this talk, I will present essential parts of my book, Nation City Arena, Sports Events, Nation Building and City Politics in Indonesia. So it was recently published by NIAS Press. And what I will talk about today, so first in the introduction, to introduce the framework and key aspects of the study. And then I will also go back in time. So what Lilis already mentioned, the sports events in the 60s, related to nation building and Jakarta-centeredness during the Sukarno and then during the Suharto era. And then I will come to kind of the main focus of my study. So the developments in post-Suharto Indonesia and what I call the turn to the civic, with the example of the city of Palembang and its sports city strategy and remapping. And in the last part of my presentation, I will discuss the 2018 Asian Games in more detail, because this is the most recent one and also the biggest sports event in Indonesian history. Before starting my introduction, I would actually like to share two very inspiring moments during my research. So this book is based on my PhD thesis. So I did field research between 2013 and 2018. And the first time I arrived in the city of Palembang, that was in 2013, and the city was hosting the Islamic Solidarity Games. And I mean, I was a bit nervous coming to a new town and didn't really know what to expect. And already at the airport, I was welcomed in such a nice and wonderful way. So volunteers were coming up to me and asking whether I need any help and starting a conversation. So it was just great. I just had to tell them, well, actually, I'm not an athlete, so I'm not really part of the event, but I'm more interested, in the event in general. But it was just so, heartwarming to receive such a welcome at the airport. And the second event that really stayed with me is the opening ceremony of the 2018 Asian Games. So I was in the Bung Karno Stadium and I really had goosebumps, and it was such an impressive moment. So it's maybe also kind of a nice thing to have, like these memories, and it's part of my research journey. And I really cherish these memories. Now coming to the first part, the introduction. So it was already mentioned, but maybe just to summarize again the general contributions and then the approach of my study. So I really tried to do a comprehensive study of international multi-sports events in Indonesia between 1962 and 2018. Because when I started to be interested in the topic, I realized that there was hardly any English language academic literature on it. So that was also encouraging me to go deeper into this topic and to analyze sports events, to reveal these different junctions and entanglements between sport and the nation and city politics and place marketing in Indonesia. And to look at these events over time also helped me to reflect on these different political aspirations and also the changes happening, the power structures and also global influences at the different time periods. And for quite a long time, I was thinking how to structure my work. So in the end, it made sense to kind of stick to the chronological order, but also to look at it in a spatial geographical way. So really to see this big change from Indonesia being so centralized and nation-centric to giving more importance to the civic level after the fall of President Suharto. And talking about geography, so what is the setting? So of course, everybody knows that Jakarta is the most relevant city in Indonesia concerning city politics and urbanism. And this was also reflected in sports events. So Jakarta was the most frequent host city. But as I said, so in recent years, due to the decentralization process, we can really see this development from nation-centric to making cities new arenas of power and representation. And in my point of view, the sports event reflects this so well. And the city of Palembang is like the example to demonstrate this as a new host city and a new sports city in Indonesia, which could only develop in the post-Suharto era. What are the main arguments? Just the key aspects. So sports events in Indonesia reflect the relation between national and city politics. As I already mentioned, the country's development from being nation-centric and Jakarta-centered to more regional autonomy, and also that regional cities become arenas of representation and local agency. A second argument is that their performative nature and the visibility and symbolic power make sports events coveted prizes for different stakeholders. And then my argument related to the city of Palembang and its development into a sports city, which I call remapping. I will discuss this in more detail later. So this contributed to new negotiations with regard to power hierarchies and legitimacies in Indonesia. And also these changes in the city demonstrate the proliferation of city promotion and branding exercises in Indonesian cities. This is just an overview of the sports events I discuss in the book. So during the Sukarno era, it's the 62 Asian Games, the 63 Games of the New Emerging Forces. During the Suharto era, it's the Southeast Asian Games. Jakarta hosted 3 events in this time. And in the post-Suharto era, I discuss the 2011 Southeast Asian Games, the 2013 Islamic Solidarity Games, and the 2018 Asian Games. So when discussing sports events, of course, I have to place my discussion within the broader debate about sports events. And on the one hand, it's about sport and nation building. So the role of sport to build national consciousness, identity, patriotism, etc. But my focus is even more on the urban context. And this also relates to discussions about modern sport as urban events. So it's often related to aspects of urbanization, city development, city marketing, and branding strategies. And my discussions also relate to other debates about the attractiveness of hosting such events. So there is the persistent belief in the ability of these sports events to bring about social change, economic development, prestige, and a shortcut to modernity to the host city and the host country. Now I come to the second part, so sports events, nation building, and Jakarta-centeredness in the Indonesian past. So when we look at the period of President Sukarno, we have a strong link between sport and nation building. And Indonesia can be seen as an example of sport being related to the emergence of a modern nation state out of colonialism. And Sukarno played a key role in this process and also in promoting sports. So he saw sports as a very powerful tool for nation and character building. And he was interested in hosting events as a means to boost Indonesia's standing in the world, and of course also his personal position in global politics. As Lilis already mentioned, politics played a crucial role in these events. So there was actually strong politicization going on. But what I discuss now is more these aspects of nation and center. So with regard to nation building, the events helped to make sport a part of building what was called a new Indonesia, which was often related to a revolutionary spirit, which was one of the key elements of Sukarno's policy. So to create an identity of Indonesia as a revolutionary nation. But the sports events were, of course, also related to national unity and pride, and had the goal to create modern patriotic citizens. Especially these sports events in the 60s were very important for Jakarta and its role in the country. So it really developed into a metropolitan city and in this time, and hosting these events and having a new infrastructure also manifested Jakarta's role as the capital, because it wasn't actually that clear at that time. And we have all these urban transformation and the building of prestigious buildings, and of course the modern new sports venues such as the Bung Karno Stadium, which is still kind of the key symbol of these events and of sport and sports events in general in Jakarta. So also having a very, very long legacy. Moving on to the new order. So of course, there was such a juncture at this time. So Suharto broke with all the political mindset of the Sukarno era. So it's quite natural that you would also see major changes in Suharto's sports policy. So what we see now in the following decades is also in a way not so surprising, that we have a strong link between sport and pembangunan. And it's also about kind of shaping people, but it's not anymore this really global outlook related to sports events. So it's more the focus on Southeast Asia, and which we can see is also linked to Indonesia's role in the ASEAN. So Jakarta was hosting the SEA Games in this time period. And now we can see this really undisputed role of Jakarta as host city. So Jakarta's monopoly over politics, economy, and urban trends also meant that it was really the undisputed candidate to host international sports events. And the centralization and bureaucratization of sports events and other sectors of society were also kind of reflected in these sports competitions. And this strong centralization of all parts of society also means that it was such a big juncture again now after the fall of President Suharto, so that we can actually talk about a turn to the civic. And now in this part, I come to my case study of Palembang. But before introducing Palembang and its urban changes, just a bit of background to this time period and the major changes in Indonesia. So with this turn to the civic, I mean that there was this huge shift of power and attention from the national to the city level, and from the capital to more peripheral cities. Of course, that doesn't mean that Jakarta became unimportant, but it's more to say, especially in comparison to the New Order period, there were more opportunities for urban, for regional centers in Indonesia to act on their own and to create their own policies. And especially secondary cities could claim stronger and more visible positions. So with secondary cities, I mean, it's usually the kind of regional capitals and economic centers maybe within Java, but maybe also outside of Java. And two major trends were important in this process. So first of all, we see rapid urbanization in Indonesia. So this already started during the new order. So it's a longer process, but it also had strong effects on cities. And of course, this Big Bang decentralization, so to introduce regional autonomy, had a huge impact on Indonesian cities. So we can see new forms of city agency, new claims to decision-making power, and new sites of opportunity for representation and urban renewal. And also a new trend of personalization of performance, of politics, or of city politics, and an increasing intercity competition going on. So Indonesian cities also entering a more global neoliberal competition. And we can see more marketing going on, branding initiatives, and what is called urban boosterism with major projects, for example, infrastructure projects. Now coming to Palembang. So the city can look back on quite a long period of economic development, but especially during the new order, it was marginalized, as were so many other places in Indonesia. What makes Palembang actually a very interesting case is that it has a long-lasting, fairly negative reputation of criminality and violence and pollution and backwardness and boredom. And well, I always like to read this quote from a publication in the early 2000s, which I think it's like really telling what this negative reputation actually meant. So I quote, Palembang is above all branded as extraordinary, dangerous, is furthermore said to be dirty, chaotic, ugly, backward, and boring. Its inhabitants are generally seen as aggressive, backward, undisciplined, treacherous, and criminal. So basically, this is kind of the worst you can get as a place. So, so there was definitely the need and the pressure to improve this image. And now talking about the post-Suharto era, now there was also the opportunity for local agency to do something about it. And out of this, there was the development of a strategy to make Palembang a sports city. Well, it was a strategy in a way that kind of developed into a strategy, because it was not kind of a clear plan in the beginning, and then it would just evolve. But like with different aspects coming together, there was a sports city strategy coming up in these years. And this also meant that Palembang was then able also to challenge Jakarta's dominance as a host city, and in this way also to challenge all these new order certainties of centralization and power hierarchy and legitimacy. And the strategy to become a sports city and a sports events destination included, for example, to repeatedly host sports events, to establish a big sports complex with venues of international standard, and to create and communicate a success story of Palembang as a sports city, and with this also to counter this very negative image of the city, and to replace it with a new and different story about this identity as a sports city, and with this also to claim modernity and and development. And one key element also of this narrative of Palembang's success was the sports complex, so the Jakabaring Sports City, which is a sports-themed zone. That means that we have a cohesive unit of venues and buildings, all in one place, and also like venues of international standard, which is also important to be able to attract events. And this sports complex became the manifestation of the vision to make Palembang, well, they say it's kind of a world sports city. So an important sports place in Indonesia, but also with a reputation beyond Indonesia. And what is interesting, and this also reflects the general development of Palembang, that the Jakabaring Sports City was also built in a place that had a fairly bad reputation. It was said to be haunted. And now with having all these new venues and other buildings and infrastructure, it became a symbol of modernity and of transformations in the city. And it became an important asset in city competition and negotiations when Palembang was trying to become a host city again. And all these developments that happened and were somehow related to hosting sports events contributed to what I call the remapping of the city. So what is included in this process is city marketing exercises and the attempt to make Palembang a role model for other places. So that means to kind of increase the reputation and thus climb up the ladder of competition of cities in Indonesia, and also that other places would actually look at the example of Palembang. And for the aspect of re-evaluation and repositioning, this also means to actually put Palembang on the map. So in the Indonesian context, but also on the Southeast Asian map, on the map of the Muslim world, when we think about the Islamic Solidarity Games and the map of Asia related to the Asian Games. So to make the city visible and known also in an international context. There were also several exercises to make this remapping visible. So of course, what is always very attractive to use is opening ceremonies of sports events, but also other performances, and to really make the city, the whole city, a stage for popular performances. So related to the events, but also, let's say, with countdown events prior to the Asian Games, or to include different cultural programs during an event, and so forth. And all these exercises contributed to what is discussed in the literature as eventalization and festivalization of urban space. And these exercises have the target to animate urban spaces and to change them also for the citizens and to re-evaluate them. And I have some examples of these exercises, so you can talk about concerts, or what I have here in the picture with light shows. So to really change urban spaces that have been kind of less visible and somehow not very popular to really animate these places. Here are some other examples which I discuss in this context of remapping. So it's about like opening ceremonies, but also infrastructure. So Palembang was able to open the first LRT in Indonesia. So this was also strongly related to the city's success story. Now I come to the question, who is actually behind this strategy, or in whose interest is it? So we have several key actors, and then mainly they are from the local elite in Palembang and South Sumatra. So we have city and provincial governments, and also sports officials of the South Sumatran branch of KONI. But in this whole process, it became very clear that the key figure is actually the governor of South Sumatra, Alex Nurdin. So he was in office between 2008 and 2018. He was really the strong force behind many of the developments and of being able to attract events to Palembang. So, so coming to his position and his strategies, so he was successful in integrating the sports city strategy into his own personalized politics. He could even monopolize power in the arenas of politics and sports in South Sumatra, and thus had a really big influence in these sectors. And the sports events became an important stage to produce this narrative, as I said, about the success story of the city, but also to display his own success related to that, and to display strong leadership. And this, so Nurdin's role, and that he was actually able to become such a leader and to attract the events to Palembang, actually demonstrates the new possibilities of local agency in Indonesia, and the relevance of locality. So he's originally from South Sumatra, and so he had this very close links to the place, and this really shows also the changes in Indonesia, that local actors become more important. Talking about producing a success story and so on, having a sports city strategy also has many shortcomings, and there was also criticism about this process. And I just have a list of a few important aspects now, which I want to discuss very shortly. So seeing that this was like one key actor in this process, and generally it was more the local elite involved in the strategy, we can see that it had a very strong top-down strategy. So not much inclusion of the population being able to articulate any kind of wishes, demands, criticism. And this also means that several processes of exclusion and marginalization were going on, so within the city, but also within the province. And so when we look back, it somehow seems that there was kind of a long-term strategy, but it was also a mixture of a bit luck and being able to step in for some events. And now, after hosting the Asian Games, which was, of course, a very big event, there's always the question, so how to continue? So I also see that there's a lack of a long-term and more embedded strategy. So maybe not just this strong focus of events, but maybe to put it in a broader context for the whole city. And what was also strongly criticized were elements of environmental degradation, especially related to the Jakabaring sports city. And what is also a very common point of criticism when discussing sports mega events, it's also all about money and getting funds. And the question is, where does the money actually go to? And isn't it that sports events are actually just big projects that you can hunt, and that it's also related to major cases of corruption? So of course I could go a bit more into detail about this, and then maybe later on we can discuss this, but now I would like to come to the last part of my presentation to talk about the recent Asian Games. But before that, I would just give a short overview of the sports events in general in the post-Suharto era and what they reflect. So we can really see like new trends in hosting events, and these transformations from a new order policies to the post-Suharto era. And also what is quite interesting to see this increased political interest in sports events under the Yudhoyono and Jokowi administrations. So to show interest, for example, in hosting the Asian Games, which is of course a very big event. And related to this, we certainly see the increase in regional and local commitment to hosting international sports events. But this also means increasing rivalries between potential host cities. So when we have more interest, then there's also more competition. And a new phenomenon was really central in the post-Suharto era related to sports events, and then that's co-hosting. So for many events, there was always the idea to co-host or to include actually several cities to reflect Indonesian diversity. And for the Southeast Asian Games and for the Asian Games, they kind of found the same solution. So it was this combination of Jakarta and Palembang. And what that means, I will show related to the Asian Games. So you probably know that the Asian Games actually took several detours until they actually were hosted by Indonesia. So first it was Vietnam. It was supposed to host the event, but Hanoi, so the host city, withdrew in 2014. So Indonesia was only the second choice at this place at this time. But then this event became the biggest and most prestigious event ever held in Indonesia, and it was certainly a media effective and was seen as a successful hosting, which also increased feelings of nationalism and as I said, what was also important, it was the first co-hosted event in the history of the Asian Games. There were different key tales of this event. So the first one, so the spirit of 1962 was actually very interesting to see how the memory of the 1962 Asian Games was conjured up in the 2018 event, but it was a very selective memory. So what we heard in the beginning about this politicization of the event, this was not really part now of the narrative. It was more about Sukarno's charismatic leadership, about this long legacy of the Bung Karno Stadium, and leaving out the political dimension of the 62 event. And I'm sure you all saw this performance of President Jokowi during the opening ceremony. So, of course, it was also important to see that the event was just prior the presidential elections. So during the event, so the opening ceremonies and also in general, somehow the event became also a platform for the competitions and for campaigns. And especially Jokowi's performances can be seen as successful and helping him then to be re-elected. Of course, it's difficult really to prove this, but at least as a general general feeling, and that it was like showing him in a positive light certainly helped him then during the campaigns. Now coming to the two host cities. So again, it was this combination, and it was quite interesting to see in the preparation time how the two cities had very different positions. So Jakarta was actually a more reluctant host, which was also due to having 3 different governors with different agendas. But it was also about the context of all these environmental and urban issues in the capital. So on the one hand, the Asian Games put pressure on Jakarta to accelerate overdue infrastructure projects, but there was also higher chances of somehow failing and not meeting the expectations. For Palembang, it was a very different situation. So the city was more the competitive host and was already so successful in becoming a co-host that it was less about the danger of failing. And there was also a lot of negotiations going on with Jakarta and the Olympic Council of Asia, and Palembang was able to get a certain number of events, and just to be part of the event as a co-host was already such a big success. Now I come to my conclusion. So what I show in my book is the role of sports events as arenas for performance and representation. Analyzing the role of different political actors in Indonesia who have used sports events for national and city politics, and this shift from using sports events more for a national purpose to having more local agency and focus on city development and marketing. And the sports city Palembang shows this increased agency of local actors after the implementation of regional autonomy, and this increased relevance of city marketing and competition. I detail the city strategy and the related remapping. And just as a last point, so there are still discussions going on. So when I was actually publishing or writing the book, it was about Indonesia hosting the 2032 Olympics. Now this is already out of reach, but the discussion is continuing. So maybe there will be an Indonesia 2036. And does that mean to put Indonesia on the Olympic map, with which consequences? And could there be some sort of a combination of the spirit of 1962 and a spirit of 2018? And maybe a third time of co-host Jakarta Palembang, but it's all with very big question marks, and something we can maybe also discuss, but we also just have to wait for what the future brings in this part. And with this, I thank you all for your attention, together with Binbin, Ika, and Atung, the mascots of the 2018 Asian Games. Looking forward to any kind of questions that you have. And yeah, just entering the discussions of all these different topics that I introduced today. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Frederica, for like presenting the summary of the books. And this book is just like, yeah, I just like congratulate for your newly published book. And it's provide us with or start with a very positive tones. And yeah, I love it. Just like how these kind of mega sport events like provide opportunity for cities or smaller towns in Indonesia to renegotiate their position within the Indonesia or even like in the global space. But then at the end, some criticism is just like also make us wondering whether like this kind of mega sport event really turn the power from like the centralizations into like more civic powers. Is that true? It's just like because to a certain degree, for instance, like Palembang, for instance, Alex Nurdin, and then it's just like the local elites. They just not only like the key actors, but also to a certain degree these days, they also involved in the football clubs, for instance, ownership or like authority, just like the son of Alex Nurdin was also like the manager of Sriwijaya Football Club, for instance. And then, as you mentioned, it's just like Jokowi maybe to a certain degree use it like as a media to frame his like legacy and leadership for the presidential election. So is this really like turn the power into a more civic one, or just like strengthening the local elites? So I open like the opportunity for a discussion. So if there is like a participant who would like to raise a questions, yeah, you can raise your hand and I will like give the opportunity, as well as you can also write down your question in the chat. Okay, I give to Faridan Anshari.
Okay, I will lower my hand. Okay, can you hear my voice, Miss Aulia? Okay. Hello, Frederick, Dr. Trottier. How are you there?
Thanks.
Okay. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Faridian Anshari. It's a very difficult name in Indonesia, yeah, but you can call me Alpha. My occupation is a lecturer, and now I'm taking my PhD at Indonesia University. And my research background is about sport, media, and social science, but especially on the football subject. Okay. I believe I have already read your chapter about Ganevo in the Routledge Handbook of Sport. That's right. The book with the red cover. And when I'm searching about Ganevo's history, I know that you wrote that. And from that chapter, I can find that there's some point that China as a country have their own ambition and become one of the sponsorship behind that event, right? Nice information. Thank you so much. And talking about your presentation of your new book and this research is very interesting. And I believe you can find and you found the big relation between sport in Indonesia and politics. That's so nice, right? You can find the relation, you can find the connection, and there are two elements. Based on my research and my experience in the field, that in football especially, there are two the element of politics and sports are very related, right? Like Miss Aulia said earlier about Sriwijaya's owner, right? They are very close with politics and football here. But my question is, as we know that most of leader here in Indonesia, I believe you also knew that all the leader of sports federation like PSSI or another sports federation, the leader have their own interests behind the sport development. They have their own ambition. you give some spoiler about the Jokowi when he come to the opening show and he got elected again as the next president, right? There's some connection there. And my question is about the relation, the interest from the leader here. They're also trying to reach some political status inside the government and also will relate it to the power inside the society. So what do you think about this situation, Dr. Trottier? Because does this phenomenon also occur in several countries, like in German, in your place, or in another country that you already research, you already come? We want to know that. Thank you so much. That's my question. Thank you, Ms. Aulia.
Okay, thank you, Mas Faridian Ansari. And the second question is like from Ibu Tungjulan.
So do we collect questions?
Maybe, yeah. It's or would you like to answer it directly one by one?
Well, it might be a bit, depends whether they are then related, because otherwise I might forget the first one when answering the second one.
So maybe we can answer for the first question then from the Mas Faridian Ansari. So it's just like, what do you think about the relationships between the political leaderships and the sport, like kind of, is it also like part of the politicizations of sport?
Yes, so starting to research on it and being somehow involved in sports in Indonesia, it's really obvious and really striking how much it is related to politics and how many political actors are involved. And I think especially for the case of Palembang, what I looked at, this kind of Nurdin dynasty being involved and not just on the football pitch, but with the events. And so I think this is very strong in Indonesia, and of course that's also quite problematic that it's such a close link. So it means that politicians who are involved in sports always have their specific agenda related to it, and it's about what I said, this like personalized politics. It's also kind of using the platform to perform themselves and to get more votes and so on. I mean, with Alex Nurdin's son, it actually didn't work out that he became the new governor. So somehow people maybe don't always follow maybe the strategy of the elites, and then they can vote for somebody else. But I think it's really something that also maybe scholars or the public in Indonesia has to discuss, so that it's more visible and that it's not just accepted, but maybe really entering a public debate about some sort of comparison. I mean, of course, I'm also interested in what is going on in Germany, but I haven't done any kind of academic discussion about comparing places. Maybe in European countries, it's a bit more hidden, the political interest. But what we can certainly see is similar situations in other Southeast Asian countries. So I know from my colleague, Simon Creek, who has worked on sports in Laos, that it's also a country where it's extremely closely linked to the political elite and Chinese influence, which is maybe also the case in other Southeast Asian countries, especially in mainland Southeast Asia. So we have also actors from outside influencing sports policies, which is of course related then to funds and infrastructure and so on. So that could be an interesting project to have more comparisons between different countries. But yeah, I'm quite confident that there's a lot of similarities in this area with the role of politics in other Southeast Asian countries.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer, Dr. Chotier. If is it okay for you if someday I contact you by email and ask you something about nationalism and sport?
Please, yes, go
Okay.
ahead, and that's
Okay.
like for everybody. So I would be happy to kind of increase our small discussion circle about sports in Indonesia. So that'd be great.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a nice day. Thank you, Miss Aulia.
Yeah, thank you for Mas Faridian and Frederica for starting the discussion this morning or this afternoon in Indonesia. And then there is like okay, the second question, Ibu Tum.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Frederica. I hope I pronounce your name right. Yes. My question is about the difference between the two cities in relation to identity. Palembang is more a Muslim city and a Malay related city, right? Like you mentioned that. But Jakarta is more cosmopolitan. So I just like to know how the Palembang actors struggle in putting themselves in that kind of identity. Because you mentioned about modernity, but when we're talking about Islam and revival in the country, it's not really talking about the cosmopolitan. It's a difference, So what happened in Palembang? When you're talking about this modernity, how they struggle between trying to create the modern one, what so-called modern, and then what they want to keep in the Muslim identity in relation to the city. So I would like to know how they negotiated or how they struggle on creating it, certain identity, that difference, That's what I would like to know more from your research. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's really an interesting aspect. And I think this whole discussion about modernity or how sports brings up modernity, it's kind of on the surface. So that's something that comes up very often, but it's not really clear what is actually meant by it. So it can be related, let's say, to kind of urban development, and then to say, okay, the sports events brings funds, and we can improve the infrastructure, and thus to have better, or this urban development and so on, and this means modernity. So it's just like putting the label on top of it, but that doesn't mean that that there's really a strong message or kind of something deeper behind it, which makes it also a bit difficult to analyze. So it's often, at least how I experience it, more a buzzword. The modernity, to say that Indonesia is moving forward, and then the city of Palembang is somehow an example for this, and it's kind of future oriented. But and of course, sport is often seen like this modern competitive sport as being Western and thus also being modern. But I could see the conflict of relating this kind of to Western sports and modernization with having this, what you said, kind of a Muslim Malay identity. So you wouldn't discuss it too much, because then maybe people don't really want to follow it, because it's kind of too Western. So I think this is what you said about negotiating and maybe having sort of conflict, how much emphasis you actually put on this idea of modernity. And I think this was also very visible during these Islamic Solidarity Games, because that was a Muslim event, like an event for the Muslim world. But like these main actors, they were kind of navigating and being very hesitant about really putting emphasis on a certain way of Islam, which was also in this context of the Muslim world, where you have conflict going on between different countries, and so it was extremely difficult for the local actors to kind of make clear messages, because they were talking to kind of the people in their own city, but also to this international audience of the Muslim world, and so I think just saying something about, okay, this shows that our city is modernizing, could just be a very general statement. But it would also be interesting to look a bit deeper at this again, this kind of struggling between the different messages and who is actually the target group. And Palembang is also, well, of course, not as cosmopolitan as Jakarta, but you also have different groups. So you have migrants from other places of Indonesia, and that means you also don't want to marginalize them too much with your messages. So on the one hand, there's always the attempt to say, well, sport is something that unites everybody. But when you have a closer look, it gets more complicated. So thanks also for raising this question. I think it's also kind of food for thought to continue reflecting on it.
Okay, thank you, Frederica. And there is like another questions in the chat by Mbak Tina Susamto. Would you like to raise your questions or like to be unmute, or I just read the questions? Mbak Tina, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here, but I'm in the cafe, so I'm afraid that here is too crowded sound.
Okay, so is it okay? I will read your question for Frederica.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you very much. If you can read it, thank you.
Okay, so I'm curious to know how such big, expensive sport project can be used to solidify all, although different ethnic communities, different political choice, by touching the sense of nationalism in the mean of integration of a nations. So that's the question from Tina Susamto.
Thank you for the question. I think this is part of the general debate related to sports mega events. So is it only an elite project, and they just project the image of, well, this will help the whole country, and this will kind of help to unite people and so on. So is it only an idea of a certain elite, or does it actually really encourage some sort of feeling of national unity and so on? So it's not only the Indonesian context, I would say. And there are very controversial answers to this. So I think in general, these big events, especially in recent years, have caused more controversies and also more conflicts, in a way that there's increasingly the question of who is actually benefiting, and does it really help a city and a nation in developing or in solving any kind of problems. And most of the time, the answer is actually no. So it's only a one-time event, and then it's gone, and it's expensive. Maybe it leaves behind some big empty stadiums and so on. But on the other hand, I think there are certain moments during sports events that can somehow influence people who are experiencing this moment to somehow relate to their nation, or to feel some sort of pride. And I would say sport is still one of these few platforms or occasions where this can happen. And let's say the like badminton competitions, and then you have everybody coming together to watch it. And even if the Indonesian player loses at the end, there is this feeling of support and of pride and sportsmanship. So I think certain moments can somehow still increase a feeling of belonging and unity, but they're probably kind of rare. And the question is, how are they long lasting or something? But it's definitely related to people's emotions. And so in a way, can be linked to feelings of nationalism, but in a more inclusive and not so much exclusive way. But it's always a very thin line, and it's very complicated to really pinpoint events that have this only kind of a positive outcome for a community and for a nation. Maybe it would also be better to downsize these events and to look more at local and community sports events, and they might have better chances to create some feeling of belonging, but on this more local level, that it's not this really huge events that have really or bring up more issues and controversies.
Okay,
I hope this.
Thank you, Frederica. Sorry if so much noise here.
But yeah, still thanks for joining and for raising the question.
Yeah, thank you, Frederica and Mbak Dina. It's just like, sport to a certain degree also like provide kind of effervescence nationalism. It's just like, to a certain degree, maybe after watching sport or like the win of Olympics, it just like give us another feelings that, oh, we are feeling proud with the nation, etc. And that's one of the role of just like conducting or arranging these kind of mega events. We still have like maybe like another 5 to 10 minutes. Is there any questions from other participants? The question can also be in Bahasa Indonesia, and I will try to translate it if the question is in Bahasa Indonesia.
Mbak Olaya, may I ask questions? Hello.
Oh, Pak Iqbal?
Yeah, thank you. Frederica, can your conclusion about Indonesia be generalized to any big sport event that is not yet economically profitable? I mean, your conclusions cannot be. It's become political because it's not something not economically profitable, or that the sport has not become an industry yet. So what do you think about that? Because, for example, with regard to the ASEAN Games, for example, I'm not sure if Indonesia can make profit from the events. So it must be politically important to organize such events.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So the general question about yeah, kind of outcome, or for whom is it actually profitable, and is it related to the economy, or is it only related to political interest? So that's also a very vivid debate, especially related to the Olympic Games. So because especially in recent decades, it's hardly possible to host a sports mega event and have a positive economic outcome. So usually it's far more expensive than was calculated in the beginning, and so on. And there's always the question then, like, who profits, or who's actually paying the bill? And often it's public money. So then it's very debatable whether that is really a positive outcome for the population. For the Indonesian case, well, it's probably also that it's not really economically that interesting, but at least what I found positive in a way is that there was more renovation going on concerning venues than building another, I don't know, a huge stadium that is then not used, and so on. So at least to rather use the venues that were already existing was a better strategy than building a lot of new ones. Concerning the political interest or kind of outcome, I think we also have to divide into what is more domestic politics and then what is maybe foreign politics. And many sports events are also supposed to increase the international reputation. And I think this is something politicians also often strive for when hosting an event, to really show the international audience we are capable of doing this, and we want to have a stronger position, let's say, as a Southeast Asian country within Asia. And of course, it's also, again, something very difficult to measure. But this is an aspect that is important for many countries. And you would say, okay, you want to be visible also as a country in the international context and taken seriously. And being a somewhat successful host of a sports mega event, I think, can contribute to a more international image. But if local or domestic politics kind of overrides this more global focus, I think then it has, I would say, kind of the image of, it's being used just for certain politicians and for domestic issues. I think this is also something to kind of continue debating. So it's also really a broader debate happening in many countries that host a sports mega event.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Frederica and Pak Iqbal. It's just like, yeah, it's still like a big issues for Indonesia, I think, to transform sport or like including like football into like industries. And there is like other small question in the chat. It's about, Frederica, do you have any idea about the, it is like the failure of the Indonesian Football Associations? This is like underrated achievement. Did your research also related with this one? It's a question from Mbak Ana.
I have to admit that I actually left out football a little bit, because I thought if I include football, then this is kind of a section on its own, and it really has a lot in there. So I'm very happy that, for example, Aulia is doing research on football now. So, I mean, I kind of follow what is going on in the football arena in Indonesia, but it's, yeah, it's kind of just going from one kind of, yeah, failure to another embarrassment. So that's very much an outsider's perspective. So I can't say much about it. So I think there are other experts on this to continue the discussion.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you, Frederica. Just like, yeah, and just like sport is a very huge topics, and like also like a big research interest for to be explored in the future for all the scholars, or like maybe like all participants here who would love to observe and like to get deeper into the relations of sport and politics in Indonesia, or even like the urban development. And it's, yeah, and it's actually give a positive tone for all of us to develop this kind of study, especially it's not just like before the Olympics 2032, for instance, Indonesia actually will host the U20 World Cup, which should be held this year actually, but due to the pandemic, the U20 World Cup will be postponed until 2023, and it will be hosted by at least 6 cities in Indonesia. It's including Jakarta, Surakarta, Surabaya, Gianyar Bali, Palembang, and Bandung. So it's like a very huge football event that will be hosted in Indonesia, and it's just like still a very huge question as well for all of us. Is it really for like turning the power into more like civic power, or it's just like still politicized by certain powers, including the domestic elites or like the local elites? So I think that's the discussion for today. I return the opportunity to the host, Mas Yoka.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Aulia, and thank you very much, Frederica, for the presentation. And this is information and so important. So, but before we close the main event, please, ladies and gentlemen, open the video to take the photo for documentation. And I would like to say thank you for the all participants to participate in this discussion. Mbak Email will be take the picture. Oke.
Ya.
Silakan Bapak Ibu untuk membuka videonya untuk diambil foto. Oke. First slide.
First slide.
Oke, 1, 2, 3. Oke, slide kedua. 1, 2, 3. Oke, slide terakhir. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. And on behalf of PMBLIP, thank you for making time to join us here today. I wish you all a pleasant day and stay healthy. And thank you for all the participants also and the speaker.
Yeah, thank you also from my side. Terima kasih banyak and sampai jumpa.
Thank you, Frederica. Thank you.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih Aulia, Yoka, Email.
Terima kasih
Ya.
teman-teman semua.
Terima kasih.
Aulia.
Ada link adsensi nggak katanya?
Ya,